The air was already cooling when I stepped out of my truck and shut the door behind me. It was that late autumn chill, the kind that seeps in under your sleeves before you even notice it, and by the time you do, you're already shivering. I could smell the dampness of the soil under my boots, the rot of leaves that had given up their color weeks ago. The forest around me was dense, black-green even in daylight, and the kind of quiet that isn't really quiet, the kind where you can hear your own blood moving in your ears. I was 34, single, no one waiting for me at home, and for some reason that made this trip feel necessary. Not for fun, not for a video, not to prove anything, just a night alone, off-grid, no camera to capture it. I wanted something raw, unrepeatable, a memory that couldn't be edited later. I'd picked a spot about 5 miles off a Forest Service road in the Cascades. The locals had given me looks when I'd asked about it. Not the friendly, you'll love it nods, but that pause people make when they're deciding whether to tell you what they've really heard. The old man at the gas station finally said it. Folks see lights out there. Hear voices. He'd smiled like he was half joking, but his eyes hadn't been joking at all. I should have laughed it off. And maybe part of me did, but there was another part, deeper down, that wanted to know if the woods really kept secrets, or if people just didn't stay long enough to find out. The first 2 miles in were easy. The trail was narrow but clear, the sound of my boots crunching over frost-covered needles steady and rhythmic. After that, the path broke apart, like the forest had decided it was done, showing me where to go. I picked my way over roots and fallen logs, pushing through thin-limbed furs that clung to my jacket. Every step took me further from the truck, from the road, from the last place where you could even pretend there was cell service. By the time I reached the clearing, I'd picked on the topo map. The sun was skimming the tops of the trees, bleeding that deep orange light that lasts only a few minutes before it dies completely. I set my pack down, listening. No wind, no running water, just the slow creak of the trees settling in the cold. There's a moment when you're alone in a place like that. No buildings, no people, no hum of electricity, where your senses rewire themselves. You start hearing things you normally wouldn't. The faint tapping of a branch against another, the dry pop of bark contracting in the cold, your own breath becoming part of the soundscape. It feels ancient, like you've slipped backward in time to when humans were still prey. I pitched my tent quickly, working with the urgency that comes when you can feel the light disappearing, even if you're not looking at the sky. My headlamp was ready in my pocket, but I didn't want to use it until I had to. Light in the woods feels like an announcement, like telling everything around you exactly where you are. By the time the tent was up and the small fire going, the darkness had closed in. The clearing wasn't really a clearing anymore. It was a bubble of firelight inside a wall of black. My breath rose white in front of me. I ate a quick meal, more for warmth than hunger, and let the fire's crackle fill the silence. It was somewhere around 8 when I first heard it. Not a branch snapping, not the wind. This was softer, rhythmic, almost like someone walking, but slow, deliberate. I froze, listening. The sound stopped too. I told myself it was an animal, a deer, maybe, but I've been in the woods enough to know how deer sound. This wasn't that. This was heavier, closer to the sound of a person's footfall on damp earth. I turned my headlamp on, sweeping the beam in slow arcs through the trees. The light caught nothing but bark and needles, shadows darting away as I moved. I kept it on longer than I needed to, hoping to catch some flicker of movement. Nothing. Still, the hair on my arm stayed raised. I put another log on the fire, trying to make the clearing feel less vulnerable. That's the trick the woods play on you at night. They make you believe that light is safety, when really it's just a beacon. Out there in the black, anything could be watching. An hour later, the sound came again. This time from the opposite side of the clearing. I sat up straighter, my body tensing without my permission. The fire popped, and in that split second of noise, I thought I heard something else. A low hum, like a voice too far away to make out words. I stood and moved toward the edge of the firelight, headlamp off this time. My eyes adjusted slowly, shapes taking form in the dark, the jagged line of a downed tree, the thin spears of grass catching frost, but nothing human. No eyeshine, no movement. The voice, if it had been a voice, was gone. By midnight, the temperature had dropped below freezing. My sleeping bag was rated for it, but I could still feel the cold pressing in, a slow, creeping thing that seemed to come from the ground itself. I lay there listening, every creak and rustle amplified in the silence. At some point, I must have drifted off. When I woke, it wasn't to a sound, it was to an absence of sound. The fire had burned out, and even the forest seemed to have gone still. My breath fogged in the darkness as I listened. Then it came, a single, sharp knock, like wood striking wood. Not close, but not far either. I sat up, straining to hear. Another knock, exactly the same from the other direction. I've heard about this. Primitive communication, some say. A way certain animals or people signal each other in the woods. I didn't move. The third knock came from somewhere behind my tent. My pulse hammered in my ears. I unzipped the bag slowly, every movement deliberate, and reached for the hatchet I kept by the flap. My hand was slick with cold sweat. I didn't want to turn on the light. Not yet. Light would tell me where I was, but it would also blind me to where they might be. I sat there in the dark, holding my breath until my lungs burned. And then I heard it. That low hum again. Closer this time. It wasn't words. Not exactly. More like the cadence of speech without the detail, the way a conversation sounds when you hear it through a wall. My skin prickled as I realized it wasn't coming from one direction. It was all around me, threading through the trees, just at the edge of hearing. I forced myself to breathe evenly, to quiet the sound of my own heartbeat so I could listen. The hum wavered, then fell silent. For a long moment there was nothing. No wind, no forest sounds, just the frost settling on the tent walls like a fine, whispering powder. Then a single footstep, soft, deliberate, pressing into the frozen ground behind me. I turned on the headlamp without thinking. The beam shot into the black, slicing through the trees in a trembling arc, but there was nothing. Only the skeletal outlines of fir branches and the white breath that poured from my mouth. I stepped out of the tent, hatchet in one hand, lamp in the other, scanning the perimeter. The beam caught on a patch of snow between two trees. Fresh snow, just a thin dusting, but enough to show impressions. Footprints. They weren't deep, just faint ovals pressed into the surface, leading in from the darkness toward my tent. And they stopped less than 10 feet from me. No turnaround marks, no retreat, just gone. I felt something tighten in my chest. Not panic exactly, but that primal recognition that you are not alone, and whatever else is here isn't playing by your rules. I backed toward the fire pit, fumbling to get the embers going again, the headlamp's beam jittering with my every movement. I didn't dare look away from the trees for long. When the flames caught, the clearing bloomed in light again. And that's when I saw it, not a person, not an animal. Just past the reach of the firelight, between two trunks, something stood. Still, watching. I could see the faintest outline. Tall, maybe 6 feet, maybe more, but narrow, almost too narrow to be human. Its edges seemed to blend into the shadows, like it wasn't standing in front of the darkness, but made of it. I froze, afraid that moving would make it move too. The fire popped, throwing sparks into the air. For a fraction of a second, the sparks lit the shape more clearly, and I swear I saw a face. Pale, featureless, except for the eyes. And then it was gone. I didn't hear it leave. No footsteps, no rustle of leaves, just empty space where something had been. I stayed up the rest of the night, hatchet on my lap, staring into the trees until my eyes burned. Every now and then, I'd hear that faint hum again, but never close enough to make out words. The sky finally began to lighten, that slow shift from black to deep blue that feels like the forest is letting you go. My body ached from the cold and from staying tense for so long. I packed quickly, my hands stiff and clumsy, refusing to look behind me. The hike out was silent. No birds, no wind. The footprints were gone, melted or covered by frost, and the woods looked exactly as they had when I came in. Ordinary. But halfway back to the truck, I noticed something hanging from a low branch over the trail. It was a piece of twine, tied in a small loop. Inside the loop was a flat, round stone. The stone had been carved with a single line down the middle, like a crude eye. I didn't touch it. When I reached the truck, I turned the key and drove without stopping, without looking in the mirrors, until I was well past the forest line. Even now, I don't tell people where that clearing was. Not because I'm afraid they won't believe me, but because I know they might believe me too much, and because some places aren't meant to be found twice. For days after, I carried the woods with me, not in the romantic way people talk about, not as some warm glow of solitude and self-discovery. No, it was more like the weight of a shadow I couldn't step out from under. The hum still played in my memory, that strange, toneless murmur slipping into the quiet moments between tasks. I'd be making coffee and hear it under the hiss of the kettle, walking down a street, and I'd feel it vibrate somewhere deep in my chest. It wasn't sound, not anymore. It was an imprint. I told myself I had imagined it. I replayed every minute of that night, trying to patch the fear with rational explanations. Maybe the footprints were distorted animal tracks. Maybe the figure was a trick of light and tired eyes. Maybe the hum was wind, reshaped by the trees. But the more I tried to rewrite it, the more certain I became that I wasn't meant to erase it. It's strange how fear, the kind that truly reaches into you, doesn't just live in your memory as an enemy. It can become something else, a teacher in its own cold, relentless way. I realized that in those hours by the dead fire, I hadn't been thinking about bills or deadlines or the quiet emptiness of my apartment. My mind had been stripped to its bare essentials: survival, awareness, stillness. I had been present in a way I rarely let myself be in the civilized world. And there was something else. Out there, I wasn't the center of anything, not the hero of the story, not even a particularly important character. I was just one living thing among countless others. Some I could see, some I couldn't, and some that I might never be able to explain. That humbled me. It's easy to walk through your days believing you know how the world works, that it's been mapped and measured and cataloged into neat categories. But in that clearing, in the breath between those knocks, I felt the truth that there are places where the rules we know bend, places that look back when you look at them. You don't always get to understand. You just have to stand there, heartbeat pounding, breath visible in the cold, and acknowledge that you're not the one in control. When I think about going back, and yes, I do think about it, I don't picture myself walking in with a camera or backup or some weapon bigger than that hatchet. I picture walking in exactly the way I did the first time. Alone. No lens between me and what's there. Because part of me wonders if the thing I saw, the thing that stepped into my firelight, only came because it knew I wouldn't capture it, wouldn't turn it into something for other people to consume. That maybe for just a few hours, I was trusted with something most people never even get close to. And that trust, even if it came from something I still can't name, is worth carrying. I've stopped telling people not to camp alone. I've stopped warning them about the stories locals tell. Instead, I tell them this: if you go deep enough, if you stay quiet enough, the woods will give you a piece of themselves. But you have to be willing to leave with more questions than you had going in. You have to be willing to let it follow you home. And you have to be willing to let some things remain unseen. There's a point, days or weeks after you've left the woods, when you realize the story isn't over. You can be sitting at your kitchen table watching the light fade through the blinds, and it will hit you. That same quiet from the forest, the same pause in the air before the knocks began. And in that pause, you understand something you didn't have words for before. You never really walk out of a place like that. The dirt stays under your nails longer than it should. The smell of smoke lingers in your jacket, and somewhere in the still corners of your mind, the firelight still dances at the edge of the trees just before something moves in the dark. You start to notice the patterns of the world more closely, the way the wind shifts direction for no reason, the way a bird call stops halfway through its song, like it's listening to something you can't hear. You watch shadows more than you used to. You walk slower, as if giving something a chance to keep pace with you, and you realize you've been changed. It's not that you're braver, it's that you've met a truth you can't unmeet. The truth that the world is wider, stranger, and less interested in your comfort than you once believed. And somehow, that feels like a gift. Fear isn't just a warning, it's a threshold. Cross it, and you can't go back to the person you were before. You've been initiated into a larger story, one you don't control, that one you don't get to write. You become a participant instead of an observer. That night in the deep woods taught me something I didn't expect. There's a kind of freedom in not being the one holding the map. There's beauty in walking into the unknown with nothing but your breath in the cold air, your boots on the frozen ground, and your willingness to be small. And if you're lucky, you leave with something more than just the memory of fear. You leave with the knowledge that the world doesn't need you to be its master, only to respect the parts of it that will never be explained. That's why I've never told anyone the exact location. It's not just to protect it, it's to protect me. Because that clearing, that cold firelight, that pale face just beyond the edge, they're not just part of the forest anymore. They're part of me. And some things, once they become part of you, should never be given away. Sometimes I dream about it. Not nightmares, not exactly, though I do wake up with my heart racing. In the dreams, I'm back in that clearing. The fire's low, my breath is white in the air, and I know something's in the trees. I can't see it, but I can feel it watching, the way you can feel the sun on your skin even with your eyes closed. And every time, just before I wake, I turn my head toward the dark, toward the place where the light stops, and I see it. It's never the same shape twice. Sometimes it's tall and narrow, sometimes low to the ground. Sometimes I think I see a face, sometimes just the glint of eyes that disappear before I can focus. But always there's that same stillness, not the stillness of peace, but the stillness of something waiting. I used to wake from those dreams unsettled, unable to shake the feeling that I'd been marked somehow. Now I think of them differently. It's as if the forest hasn't forgotten me, and maybe never will. As if, for one cold night in late autumn, I stepped far enough off the map to be noticed, and in its own strange way, the woods said, "You belong to us now." And maybe that's the truth. Maybe we all belong to the wild, no matter how much concrete we build between ourselves and the trees. Maybe the knocks and the hums and the shapes at the edge of the light are just reminders, sent to pull us back when we forget. So if you ever find yourself alone in the deep woods with no camera, no phone, no plan but to be there, don't run when the darkness starts to feel alive. Don't rush to fill the silence. Listen. Wait. Let the cold wrap around you and the fire shrink until it's no bigger than your palm. Let the forest decide what it wants to show you. And when it does, don't try to bring it home. Leave it there, in the place where the light fades into the black, because that's where it belongs. And in some quiet part of you, you'll know, so do you. I still remember the way the air smelled that evening, thick with the sweetness of pine sap and the faint metallic tang of an oncoming storm. The Daniel Boone National Forest has a way of swallowing sound, wrapping you in a silence so deep it makes you question if you've gone deaf. I had been camping there for years, chasing solitude in the spaces where cell service failed and the modern world felt like a bad dream. But June of 2020 would strip away every comfort I thought I knew about the woods, replacing them with a truth I still struggle to say out loud. My name is Jacob, 34 years old, born and raised in Kentucky, and I have walked these trails since I could fit my father's old hiking boots. But nothing in those years could have prepared me for what I saw or what I didn't see afterward. It was the second day of my solo trip, a stretch of 5 days I'd promised myself before the world opened back up from lockdowns. Most people avoided remote camping that year. Fear had gripped everything. But for me, fear was the exact reason to go. I needed distance from screens, from news, from voices. My base camp was a small clearing about 5 miles from the nearest trailhead, tucked between towering hemlocks and a narrow creek, whose water ran so clear you could see the trout flicker like living silver. I had everything I needed. Food packed tight in bear canisters, my tent secured low against the wind, and a fire pit ringed in stones I'd gathered myself. The weather was perfect. Low 70s in the day, cool enough at night for a fleece jacket. But on the third evening, something shifted. Not in the weather, not in the forest itself, but in the way the world around me seemed to wait. The birds stopped singing long before dusk. Even the rustle of squirrels in the underbrush went silent. I noticed it halfway through cleaning my mess kit, the last echoes of water dripping from my sponge louder than they should have been. I glanced into the trees, thinking maybe a predator was passing nearby, a black bear, maybe a cougar. But there was nothing. Not a single branch moved. The stillness felt unnatural, like the entire forest had paused to listen to something I couldn't hear. I tried to brush it off, stoking the fire and heating a simple meal. But as the shadows thickened, a low hum began to seep into the silence. It wasn't like any machine I'd heard, not mechanical, not electrical, more like the vibration of a cello string drawn slow and deep, pressing not just against my ears but into my bones. It was so faint at first I thought it was in my head. But as the night came on, it grew, not louder exactly, but closer. I stood by the fire, turning in slow circles, trying to pin down the source. The sound didn't seem to come from any one direction. It was everywhere at once, above me, beneath me, within the very air I was breathing. I felt the hairs on my arms rise, a prickling warning from some ancient part of my mind. The forest was watching me. I grabbed my headlamp, its beam cutting pale slices through the dark. I swept it across the clearing, over my tent, the fire pit, the edge where the trees thickened into black walls. Nothing moved. But the hum kept pressing in, almost imperceptibly warping the edges of sound, as if even the crackle of my fire had been tuned a half-step lower. Then the light came. It began as a dim glow between the trees, white but not the cold, sterile white of an LED or a flashlight. This was softer and more alive, like moonlight condensed into liquid and poured into the night. It moved in slow pulses, as if breathing, each one stronger than the last. My instincts screamed at me to turn off my headlamp, so I did, standing in near total darkness with only the faint shimmer ahead, and then it grew. The glow swelled outward, the space between the trees collapsing under its advance until it was no longer a distant glimmer but a wall of impossible brightness. My eyes burned, but I couldn't look away. The hum was inside my chest now, in my teeth, rattling the fillings in my molars. I took one step backward, and the world vanished. No sound, no light, just black. I woke up lying flat on the damp earth, my mouth filled with the taste of iron. The fire was gone. The air was cold enough to bite through my jacket, and my watch read 4:17 a.m. I had no memory of the hours between. My tent stood exactly as I'd left it, but my food canisters were gone. Not moved, not tipped over, gone. My footprints were still visible in the soft earth, but no other prints, human or animal, marked the clearing. My backpack was zipped tight beside the fire pit ring, but inside my map and compass were missing. The hum was gone, too, but so was the forest's night music. No crickets, no owls. Only the sound of my own breath. I tried to stand, but my legs trembled like I'd been hiking for days without rest. My head throbbed with a deep, pulsing ache, each beat of my heart echoing in my skull. My first thought was that I'd been struck by lightning, though the sky was clear. No thunder, no clouds, just the kind of stillness that makes you feel like the world has ended while you slept. My second thought was worse, that someone had drugged me. But the more I looked around, the more that theory fell apart. No signs of forced entry to my tent, no footprints at the perimeter, and nothing missing except the items I would need most if I wanted to navigate back to safety. I picked up my headlamp, but the batteries were dead, brand new ones I'd put in that very morning. My phone, which had been fully charged before I set it aside for the trip, was completely lifeless. Even my small emergency radio wouldn't turn on. Whatever had happened hadn't just stolen time. It had drained every ounce of power I had with me. The temperature kept dropping, my breath spilling into the air like smoke. I wanted to build the fire back up, but the idea of striking a match felt wrong. Like making light would call something back. I wrapped myself in my sleeping bag, sitting on the ground because the thought of lying down felt too vulnerable. My mind spun over every possible explanation, from hallucination to some bizarre electrical phenomenon. But no matter how many rational possibilities I considered, one fact remained unshakable. I had looked into something's eyes, if it even had eyes, and it had looked back. Hours passed before the first pale stretch of dawn light seeped into the clearing. The forest began to breathe again, the distant call of a woodpecker, the dry shuffle of leaves under small paws, but it all sounded muted, like someone had placed a glass dome over the world. I stuffed what little gear I had left into my pack and started for the trailhead. Without my compass or map, I had to rely on memory, following landmarks I'd learned over years of hiking this area. But the forest felt subtly altered, as if the trail had shifted under the cover of night. By midday, my legs burned from the constant climb, and I stopped at a ridge where you could see the low valleys rolling into the distance. That's when I noticed something that made my stomach drop. The sky wasn't right. It was too pale, almost whitewashed, as if all the color had been drained from it. Even the sun seemed hazy and indistinct, more like a light bulb behind frosted glass than a burning star. I don't know how long I stood there, staring, before I realized my hands were shaking. The rest of the hike back was a blur. I remember reaching my truck and fumbling with the keys, my hands clumsy and slow. I remember the relief of hearing the engine turn over, though the dashboard clock read 3:04 p.m., and I had no idea if that was correct anymore. I drove straight home without stopping, locked the door behind me, and sat in the dark for hours, just listening to the hum of my refrigerator. It was the first sound that felt real since waking in that clearing. That night, I tried to call a friend to tell him what happened. I thought saying it out loud might make it make sense. But the moment I opened my mouth, I realized I didn't know where to start. How do you explain a light that burns like the moon but blinds like the sun? How do you describe the way it erases time from your mind, leaves you holding only the weight of its presence? For weeks afterward, I had dreams. No, not dreams. Memories, maybe. In them, I'm standing in the clearing, the hum pressing against my ribs, the white light spilling between the trees. But there's something in the light, a shape. Tall, thin, featureless, but somehow radiating intent. Every time I try to move toward it, my body freezes, and my vision fills with that same blinding brightness. I wake up sweating, my ears ringing, my teeth aching from the pressure. I've told myself over and over that there's a logical explanation, that it was some kind of localized aurora, a freak meteorological event, maybe even a seizure I didn't know I was prone to. But deep down, I know better. I know the forest doesn't just go silent for nothing. I know the birds don't just abandon the sky. And I know that whatever I saw in Daniel Boone National Forest in June of 2020 wasn't just a trick of light. It saw me, and it didn't want me to leave unchanged. The first week back, I barely left my house. I told myself it was just to rest, to get my head straight. But the truth was simpler. I was afraid of the sky. In the daytime, I kept the curtains drawn, every shaft of sunlight making my stomach knot. At night, I left the lights off, sitting in the dark like I was still out there in the woods, waiting for something I couldn't name. Sleep came in fractured pieces, each dream shoving me back into that moment when the light reached the clearing. Then things started happening in the house. Subtle things at first. My wall clock would stop for minutes at a time before ticking back to life. The radio in my kitchen, unplugged for weeks, hissed with static one morning while I was making coffee. My laptop would power on by itself in the middle of the night, its screen washed out in a pale, ghostly glow. I'd try to tell myself these were just malfunctions, cheap electronics, maybe some power surges. But it didn't explain the humming. The same low, resonant vibration I'd heard in the forest began to seep into my home. Not constant. Only for seconds at a time, spaced out over the day. Sometimes I'd hear it while sitting in the living room. Other times it would come from the ceiling above my bed, as though the sound were moving through the air itself. It didn't scare me the way it had out there, but it unsettled me in a way I can't fully explain. Like hearing your own heartbeat in a quiet room, unnatural only because you're not supposed to notice it. And then came the missing time. I'd be sitting at my desk looking through old trail maps, and the next thing I knew, the sun was gone, hours unaccounted for. I'd wake up in my recliner, the television blaring static, even though I was sure I'd never turned it on. Sometimes I'd find my boots by the door, caked with fresh mud. Once, my truck keys were on the passenger seat of my locked car. I started keeping a notebook to track my days, writing down the time every hour on the hour. But even then, I'd find blank stretches in my notes, as if I'd stopped writing and simply disappeared. One night in early July, I woke up standing in my backyard, barefoot. The grass was wet with dew, and my nightshirt clung cold against my skin. I looked up, and the stars were wrong. I can't tell you how, but they were patterns I'd never seen before, constellations bent into shapes that made my breath catch in my throat. I stood there for what felt like minutes, staring upward, until the familiar hum bled into the air again. That was when I saw it. The same soft white glow, not in the woods this time, but beyond my fence line, hovering low above the ground. It pulsed once, twice, then flared so bright I had to shield my eyes. And then it was gone, just like before. The next morning, I found the notebook on my kitchen table, open to a page I didn't remember writing. My handwriting, but jagged, uneven. The words were simple: you need to go back. I tried to ignore it. I threw the notebook in the trash, buried it under coffee grounds and old food wrappers. But the thought dug in like a splinter. Go back. I'd catch myself staring at my gear in the corner of the room, picturing the narrow creek, the hemlocks, the way the firelight flickered against the stone ring. I didn't want to return. Every instinct in me screamed to stay away. But some deeper part, the part that remembered the warmth of the light despite the fear, pulled in the opposite direction. By mid-July, I'd stopped answering calls from friends. My fridge was nearly empty. I'd spend hours tracing the outline of the forest on Google Earth, my mouse hovering over that tiny green patch that marked the clearing. And every time I'd tell myself just one more look, I'd hear it faintly in my mind. The hum, steady and patient, like it was waiting for me to decide. When the decision finally came, it didn't feel like a choice at all. One morning I woke up, packed my bag without thinking, and drove east. I didn't leave a note. I didn't tell anyone where I was going. The air was heavy that day, the sky a washed-out white that made the road ahead shimmer in the heat. The closer I got to Daniel Boone National Forest, the more familiar the hum became. Not loud, not even fully there, but woven into the background of the wind through the windows. I told myself I'd just walk the first mile in, just to see if the trail still felt the same. But when I stepped into the tree line, the world shifted. The forest was quieter than I remembered, and yet every sound that did exist felt sharper, every twig snap, every leaf rustle. My pulse synced with the hum, a rhythm I didn't know I'd been missing until it returned. I should have turned back then. I know that now. But instead, I tightened the straps on my pack and started toward the clearing. The trail wound deeper into the woods, each bend pulling me farther from the safety of the world I'd known. The air thickened, not with heat, but with a weight I could feel pressing against my shoulders. It was the same sensation I'd felt before, the forest pausing, holding its breath, but stronger now, as if it knew I was coming back. The hum was no longer distant. It threaded through the trunks of the trees, a vibration I could feel in the soles of my boots. By the time I reached the narrow creek, the sunlight had dimmed, even though the sky had been bright when I parked the truck. I knelt, splashing my face with the cold water, and caught my reflection in the ripples. For just a second, my eyes seemed wrong. Brighter, almost luminescent. But when I blinked, they were normal again. I stood too quickly, the world tilting around me, and pressed forward. The clearing was exactly as I'd left it. Fire pit intact, the stones scattered just enough to suggest time had passed, but untouched by any animal or weather. No fallen branches, no weeds reclaiming the space. It was as if the forest had been preserving it, holding it in a kind of suspension. I dropped my pack by the fire pit and stood in the center, listening. The hum grew steadier, louder. It wasn't just a sound now, it was inside me, vibrating in my chest, pulling at something deep and primal. My breath slowed without my control, my heart sinking to its rhythm. The light came next, faint at first, threading between the trees, then blooming into that familiar, impossible glow. It didn't just brighten the air. It seemed to change the air, bending it like heat over asphalt, warping the space around it. I couldn't move. My legs rooted to the ground as the glow swelled, spilling into the clearing, and in it, just like in the dreams, was the shape. Tall, thin, no features I could name, but its presence was undeniable. It wasn't just looking at me, it was inside my thoughts, unspooling them, laying them bare. Every fear, every question, every reason I'd come back was suddenly visible to it. The hum rose to a low, trembling peak, and my vision blurred. My hands began to shake, my knees weakening. But I couldn't fall, not yet. The shape moved closer, the light intensifying until it erased the edges of the world. There was no forest, no clearing, no air, just the radiance and the pull. My mind screamed to resist, but my body leaned forward, as if gravity itself had shifted toward the figure. And then, contact. Not physical, not in any way I'd ever understood. It was a flood of sensation, like every nerve firing at once. Images flashed behind my eyes, places I'd never been, skies filled with unfamiliar constellations, forests that stretched beyond the curve of the horizon. I saw my own life from above, every choice and mistake like dots on a map leading me to this exact point. I felt time folding in on itself, the missing hours from before clicking into place, though I couldn't hold on to them. Every time I tried to focus, the details slipped away, replaced by that blinding white. My chest felt heavy, but not with fear, with understanding. Not complete understanding, more like the first page of a book, written in a language I almost recognized. I wanted to ask questions, to demand why, but my voice wouldn't work. And somehow, I knew it didn't need to. It already knew what I wanted to ask. The light swelled again, a final surge, and the hum shifted, lower now, almost mournful. The shape began to recede, pulling the radiance with it. My knees buckled, and this time I fell, my palms hitting the cold dirt. The glow thinned between the trees, dissolving into the same pale nothingness I'd seen in the sky weeks earlier. The hum faded until there was only the sound of my ragged breathing. When it was gone, the forest exhaled. Crickets returned. A breeze whispered through the hemlocks, but everything felt different. Not the forest, not the air, me. My heartbeat still carried the rhythm of the hum, as if it had woven itself into me. My skin tingled, my vision sharpened, and in the distance I could see details no human eyes should have been able to catch. I stayed there until night fell, unable to decide if I'd been given something or if something had been taken from me. I left the clearing in the dark, the moon hidden behind a haze that glowed faintly, as if the sky itself still remembered what had just happened. My legs felt steady, though I couldn't recall the first mile of the hike back. One moment I was stepping over a fallen log, the next I was at the creek, its surface unnaturally still, reflecting a dim shimmer that wasn't from my headlamp. I didn't stop to investigate. When I reached my truck, the world outside the forest felt strangely hollow. The hum was gone, replaced by the weak buzz of the engine and the distant hiss of the highway. I thought I'd feel relief, like escaping a storm, but instead I felt untethered, as if I'd left something important behind. I kept glancing in the rearview mirror, half expecting to see that pale glow threading its way between the trees. At home, I found things different. My phone, which had been dead before I left for the forest, powered on instantly, but the date was wrong, 3 days ahead. I checked my watch. It matched the phone. My truck's dashboard clock, however, still read the time I'd left the clearing, as if it had frozen in that moment. The first night back, I didn't dream. Not in the way I used to. There were no images, no story. Just the hum, steady and unbroken, as if it were coming from inside my own chest. When I woke, the sound stayed with me, faint but constant. It didn't fade over the next few days. Instead, it began to sync with the world around me. I'd hear it in the refrigerator's motor, in the whir of my ceiling fan, in the distant rumble of passing cars. But it wasn't just the sound that followed me. I began noticing details I shouldn't have been able to see. The way a hawk's feathers shifted mid-flight 100 yards away, the exact number of leaves turning on a distant tree. My hearing sharpened too. I could catch conversations through walls, hear the low vibration of power lines from blocks away. It should have been exhilarating, but it wasn't. It was exhausting. Every sound felt layered over the hum, like a second language I didn't understand but couldn't stop hearing. Then came the lights. Not bright like before, just small flickers in my peripheral vision. Sometimes white, sometimes a soft blue, always gone when I turned my head. At first, I thought they were reflections, tricks of the eye. But they started appearing in places with no source. My bathroom at night, the hallway outside my bedroom, the edge of the woods behind my house. The worst was the third night after returning. I was standing in the kitchen, drinking water, when I saw it clearly in the glass of the window, the shape. Not in the yard, not outside at all, standing behind me. I spun around, but the room was empty. The hum spiked so sharply it made my teeth ache, and in the silence that followed, I heard something else for the first time. A voice. It wasn't speaking in words, not exactly, but I understood it the way you understand the emotion in a piece of music. It was a calling, not a demand, not even a request, just inevitability. The same inevitability that had drawn me back to the clearing, the same inevitability that told me this wasn't finished. For the next week, the message didn't leave me. It came in the hum, in the lights, in the way the air seemed to shift when I was alone. You will return. And deep down, I knew it was right. By the 10th day, I stopped trying to resist. Whatever thread the light had tied through me was pulling tighter, and pretending otherwise was just a way of making myself miserable. I moved through my days like I was already half gone, barely eating, forgetting to answer the phone, letting unopened mail pile by the door. At night, I'd wake to find myself standing at the window, staring east toward the forest. My hands would be pressed against the glass, fingertips numb, as if I'd been there for hours. The lights in my house no longer waited for the dark. Midday, I'd catch that same pale shimmer pooling in the corners of rooms, slipping under door frames. The shape never stood fully in view again, but I felt it there, just beyond the edge of sight. Sometimes I'd sense it at my back, the hairs on my neck prickling, the hum deepening into my bones. Other times I'd hear a faint shift in the air, like someone stepping into a room and holding perfectly still. I started packing without realizing I'd made the decision. My tent, my sleeping bag, my boots, cleaned and oiled. It wasn't until I zipped the last pouch of my pack that I noticed my hands weren't shaking. For weeks, I'd been living in a current, pulled between fear and fascination. Now the water was calm, and the direction was clear. I left before dawn. The roads were empty, the world still half asleep. The sky had that pre-morning blue that always feels like a held breath, and I swear I could see a faint glow on the horizon. Not the rising sun, but something whiter, cleaner. The hum was with me the whole drive, steady, patient. Not urging me forward, just letting me know I was on time. When I reached the trailhead, I didn't hesitate. My legs carried me as if the path had been waiting for me alone. The forest was in that strange, perfect stillness again. No bird song, no wind, no sign of other life. Every step felt both heavier and lighter, as though the air thickened with the glow ahead. The clearing was exactly as before, the fire pit, the untouched earth. But this time, I didn't stop at its edge. The hum rose like a welcome, and the light began to gather, not slowly this time, but in a sudden, breathtaking swell. It poured through the trees, spilling over the ground, surrounding me before I could even draw a full breath. The shape was there, waiting. I didn't fight it. The light folded around me, warm and weightless. My knees gave out, but I didn't fall. Something held me upright, something that felt less like hands and more like gravity bending to keep me. The hum became everything, so loud and deep that it erased the borders between thought and sound. And then, just like before, the flood came. Images, places, stars that burned in colors I had no names for. But this time there was no slipping away from them. They stayed, sharp and clear, filling me with the certainty that I wasn't seeing somewhere else. I was seeing where I was going. I turned my head once, looking back at the forest. The edges were already dissolving into brightness, the trees softening, the world I'd known flattening like an old photograph. There was no fear now, only a strange, impossible joy, and the quiet understanding that I wouldn't be coming back. The hum reached its peak, and the light surged, blinding and absolute. And then, nothing, no sound, no forest, no me, just white. Some say the forest swallows people whole, that they step off the trail, follow something they shouldn't, and simply vanish. Most get written off as accidents, bad weather, wild animals, a wrong turn that turned fatal. But sometimes the truth is quieter. If you hike the Daniel Boone National Forest at dawn, when the mist clings low and the birds haven't found their voice yet, you might hear it, a faint hum beneath the wind. Most will walk right past it, like never noticing. But if you stop, if you really listen, it will seem to grow, stretching into the space between heartbeats. Some nights, campers say they see a pale light breathing between the trees. They watch it for a while until it fades, and in the morning they find the clearing empty, except for a ring of stones where a fire once burned and the faint impression of boots in the soil. Always just one set, always leading into the trees, never back out. I don't know if I'm still in that clearing. I don't know if time passes the same way here. All I know is that the hum hasn't stopped and the light has no edges. It's warm, endless. And when I close my eyes, I can see the world I left behind, fading soft like something I dreamed once but can't quite remember. If you hear the hum, turn away. Keep walking. Don't look for the light, because once it sees you, you won't belong anywhere else. Under the shadow of the tallest pines I'd ever seen, I stood alone, my breath crystallizing in the early autumn air, and felt, for the first time in my life, that the forest was watching me back. My name's Daniel Hale. I'm 42 years old, and I've spent more than 2 decades exploring some of the most remote corners of America's wilderness. But this trip wasn't like the others. This was in a place most people don't even know exists anymore. A forgotten national park, decommissioned decades ago, wiped from most maps, left to fade into the earth. The locals whispered about it like it was a wound the land had tried to heal but never could. I'd first heard about it from an old man in a bait shop 2 towns over, his voice low, his eyes darting to the door every few seconds. He told me about the Roosevelt Glade National Park, how it used to draw hikers from across the country, how the trails were said to glow under a full moon, and how, if you camped there, you might hear voices from deep inside the timber. "It's not ghosts you should be worried about," he muttered, leaning in so close I could smell the tobacco on his breath. "It's the ones still walking." I thought he was just being dramatic. After all, I'd been in forests at night more times than I could count. The darkness is loud with the sound of your own imagination if you let it be. But something about the way his hand trembled as he pushed my change back made me listen. I found the park's old boundaries in a tattered archive map, the paper brittle and yellowed. The roads were little more than overgrown dirt veins now, winding through valleys no GPS could find. I parked my truck at the edge of what had once been a ranger station, now nothing more than a rotting skeleton of wood and rusted nails, half collapsed under the weight of moss and years. My pack was heavier than usual: food, water, and my old canvas tent, the one that had weathered storms with me before. I remember thinking I'd be fine. I'd been fine everywhere else. But from the moment I stepped past that crumbling station, it was like walking into a silence that swallowed the world. There were no bird calls, no wind in the leaves. Even my footsteps seemed to be absorbed into the soil. I made camp near a clearing where wildflowers grew in tight spirals, the colors too vivid for the season, like they'd been painted there. My first night, I built a small fire and sat with my back to a massive cedar, its bark ridged and cold against my palms. I thought I heard water nearby, a faint trickle, but when I followed it with my flashlight, there was nothing but dry creek bed and stones so smooth they looked polished. The temperature dropped hard after midnight, and I crawled into my sleeping bag, listening to the kind of stillness that feels heavy in your chest. That's when I heard it. It wasn't the snap of a twig or the rustle of branches. It was a sound shaped like words, so faint I couldn't make them out. They came in pairs, evenly spaced, like someone talking just out of reach. I unzipped the tent slowly, letting the cold bite at my cheeks, and shone my light toward the trees. Nothing moved, but the air felt wrong. The hair on my arms rose even under my jacket. The voices stopped the moment the beam swept across the clearing. I told myself it was the wind. I'd said that 1,000 times before in 100 other places, but the wind never says your name. The second day, I hiked deeper into the park, following an old trail marker half buried in moss. The ground grew softer underfoot, spongy, like the earth itself was rotting from the inside. I found remnants of campsites long abandoned, burned-out fire pits, a rusted tin mug, a child's shoe so weathered the leather had fused with the soil. I told myself the shoe could have been from anywhere, any time. Still, I marked its location on my map without thinking. My compass needle began to twitch before I'd even realized I was off course, spinning once before settling again. And that's when I noticed the footprints. They weren't animal tracks. They were human, barefoot, deep enough to show the arch, each step pressed into the ground like whoever had left them was heavier than they should have been. They trailed off into the undergrowth, and though every survival instinct screamed at me to turn back, I followed. They led me to a grove where the trees grew so close together that no sunlight touched the ground. In the center was a stone, waist high, covered in carvings I didn't recognize. Lines and swirls and shapes that seemed to twist when I stared too long. I reached out, brushing my fingers over the grooves, and felt the stone hum. Not like a vibration from machinery. This was deeper, resonating in my bones. I pulled my hand back like I'd been burned. When I returned to camp that evening, my fire pit was gone. Not just scattered, but gone. The stones I'd placed, the ash, even the blackened patch of earth where it had been. In its place was a circle of small white flowers, each facing the center. My pack had been unzipped, not rifled through, just opened, every item laid out neatly on the ground like someone had taken inventory. My stomach tightened, my mind racing between the possibility of another hiker and something else entirely. I called out, my voice breaking against the trees, "Who's out there?" The silence that answered felt satisfied. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat in the tent, knife in my lap, listening. Around 2 a.m, the voices returned, closer this time. I could hear the cadence of them, the rise and fall, but never enough to understand. My flashlight flickered, then went out entirely, and from just beyond the thin fabric of my shelter, I heard the sound of barefoot steps circling, slow and deliberate. I knew then this wasn't about me getting lost or some story to tell back in town. This was a place that didn't want me here, and yet it hadn't driven me out. Not yet. It was watching. I gripped the handle of the knife so tightly my knuckles ached. listening to each step sink softly into the soil. The pacing stopped behind my tent, and for a long moment there was nothing. No sound, no breath, just the dense, suffocating silence of something choosing whether or not to move closer. My pulse pounded so loud I was sure it could hear it. Then, faintly, as if it leaned right against the nylon, came a whisper. Not my name this time, but a sound almost like a question. 3 syllables, low and drawn out, that made my skin crawl because I couldn't repeat them back if I tried. It wasn't a language I knew. I stayed perfectly still, every instinct telling me that movement was invitation. The whisper came again, this time from the other side, as though whatever it was had moved without passing between. My breathing had gone shallow, my ribs tight. Then slowly the steps began again, padding away into the trees until the sound dissolved completely. I didn't move until the first bruised light of dawn seeped into the sky. By morning, my camp looked untouched, almost too untouched. My gear was back inside my pack, my fire pit back in place, as if the flowers from the night before had never grown there. Even my footprints from where I'd exited the tent were gone. The only sign that anything had happened at all was a small, folded scrap of paper resting on my sleeping bag. The edges were damp, the writing smeared. 4 words written in a hand too steady to have been rushed. Don't follow the stone. I packed quickly, faster than I should have, my hands fumbling with the straps. I told myself I'd head back toward the ranger station ruins, retrace the path out, but the trail markers had shifted, or maybe I had. The moss-covered post I'd passed yesterday now leaned in a different direction, pointing me deeper into the park. I checked my compass. The needle quivered, then spun full circles, refusing to settle. I tried to keep calm, telling myself this was just terrain interference, but with each step I felt more certain that something was guiding me somewhere it wanted me to go. Around midday, the forest changed. The air grew warmer, the ground less soft underfoot, and I began to hear running water again. Stronger this time, like a river. I followed the sound, half out of desperation for something familiar, and found myself standing at the edge of a stream I hadn't crossed before. The water was so clear I could see the stones at the bottom, smooth and white, like bone. They weren't scattered naturally, they formed patterns, spirals that widened and contracted with the flow. I crouched to touch the water and felt it hum the same way the stone in the grove had. That was when I noticed the figure upstream. Just far enough that I couldn't make out a face, it stood ankle deep in the current, unmoving. I raised a hand in a hesitant wave, but it didn't respond. It wasn't until my eyes adjusted to the dappled light that I realized its arms were hanging too long, reaching nearly to its knees. And then, like a breath being sucked in, it was gone. No splash, no ripple, nothing to suggest it had ever been there. I backed away from the stream, trying to keep my steps steady, but the forest around me felt more alive now, as if it had been roused. The branches shifted overhead, even without wind. Shadows pooled in unnatural shapes. Somewhere behind me, the barefoot steps returned, matching my pace, never closer, never farther. I didn't run, not yet. I knew from years of backcountry survival that running blindly in unknown terrain is a fast way to get hurt. But every muscle in my body was wound tight, screaming to put distance between myself and whatever was following. By late afternoon, I spotted a break in the trees and felt the first surge of hope I'd had since arriving. Through the gap, I could see the remnants of an old wooden sign. I pushed through the undergrowth, heart pounding, only to find the sign had no words left, just faint grooves where letters had been scraped away as if deliberately erased. Beneath it, carved deep into the post, were the same twisting symbols I'd seen on the stone in the grove. I stepped back instinctively, and in that moment, a shape crossed the clearing behind the sign. Human height, human build, but moving wrong. Each step jerky and too precise, like it was mimicking the idea of walking. I froze. The thing stopped at the tree line, tilting its head toward me. The light caught its face for just a second, and I realized there was nothing there at all. No features, just a smooth plane of skin. It didn't move. Neither did I. Then, Slowly, it lifted one long arm and pointed back toward the direction I'd come. I understood. It wanted me to leave, but the problem was, I didn't know if I still could. I took one step backward, my heel crunching on fallen twigs, and the sound cracked through the clearing like a gunshot. The faceless figure didn't flinch. Its arm stayed raised, that long, unnatural finger aimed toward the heart of the forest. I felt it then, not just fear, but the weight of a decision. Every fiber of my survival instincts screamed to obey, to turn and follow the path it indicated. But another part of me, something deep and stubborn, wanted to understand. You don't stumble into a place like this twice in your life. The air around us seemed to press inward, the temperature dropping so fast my breath turned to frost. I tightened the straps of my pack, keeping my knife at the ready, and took a step in the direction it pointed. The instant I moved, its arm dropped to its side, and it turned away, melting back into the shadows between the pines. No sound, no movement of branches, just gone, like it had never been. But the forest felt different now. The trees loomed higher, the sky thinner. I followed what I thought was the same trail I'd taken in, but the ground beneath me began to tilt, pulling me downhill. The light dimmed to the color of late evening, even though my watch said it was barely past 3. My chest tightened with that creeping, gnawing realization that time wasn't running straight here. The voices returned in the distance. No longer whispers, but a steady murmur, like a crowd gathering. I could almost pick out my own name again, braided into their rhythm. And then I smelled smoke. Not the clean tang of a campfire, but the acrid, heavy burn of wet wood and something else, something metallic. I moved toward it slowly, every step deliberate, until I broke into a clearing I didn't remember passing before. At its center was a fire pit ringed with stones, the flames inside low and orange. Around it sat 4 figures. They weren't talking, weren't moving. They just sat with their heads bowed, hands resting on their knees. I stood at the edge of the clearing, my heart thudding. "Hello?" My voice barely rose above the crackle of the fire. None of them answered. I took another step closer, and the closest figure lifted its head. The face staring back at me was my own. It wasn't a reflection. This version of me was paler, thinner, eyes sunken deep into their sockets, but it was me all the same. The second figure turned next, another me, this one with a ragged scar running from temple to chin. The third's lips were cracked and dark as though they hadn't spoken in years. And the fourth had no mouth at all. I staggered back, my legs suddenly weak. The 4 of them rose in unison, and though the firelight stayed the same, their shadows grew long, stretching toward me across the ground. My mind scrambled for any explanation. Exhaustion, dehydration, hallucination. But the cold weight in my stomach told me this was no trick of the senses. The one with the scar took a step forward, and when it spoke, its voice was mine, only lower, older. "You weren't supposed to find the stone." The words hit me like a physical blow, and I realized my hand was trembling so hard I could barely keep my grip on the knife. I didn't answer. I couldn't. My throat felt locked shut. They began to fan out, circling, moving with the same slow precision as the footsteps around my tent the night before. Every path between the trees seemed to vanish as they closed in. The fire behind them hissed, and for a second I thought I saw shapes in the smoke. Mountains, rivers, a door made of light. Then the wind shifted and the image was gone. I did the only thing left. I ran. I crashed through the undergrowth, the branches tearing at my clothes, roots clawing at my boots. The voices didn't follow this time. Instead, they stayed behind, chanting something in that same 3-syllable pattern I'd heard against my tent. My lungs burned. My legs shook. But I didn't stop until I saw the collapsed ranger station again, standing like a blackened ribcage against the sky. For the first time in 2 days, I felt wind on my face. The air here was thin but real, smelling of pine and dust instead of the heavy, damp rot of the deeper woods. My truck was right where I'd left it, but the windshield was covered in something, fine, pale dust arranged in those twisting, shifting patterns from the stone. I didn't touch it. I didn't even try to clean it off until I was 30 miles away. When I finally rolled into town, the bait shop was closed. The old man was gone. The woman at the counter of the diner next door told me she'd never heard of Roosevelt Glade National Park, that maybe I meant Roosevelt Forest, 100 miles east. I didn't argue. I just sat there, staring into my coffee, listening to the chatter of people who didn't know there was a place in the woods where time folds in on itself, where voices say your name in the dark, where your own face might be waiting for you beside the fire. And I knew, if I ever went back, I might not come out as me. I drove for hours that night, headlights carving tunnels through the dark, every curve in the road making me check the mirrors. I kept half expecting to see one of them, the versions of me, sitting in the back seat, their hollow eyes fixed on my reflection in the glass. The patterns on the windshield had faded by the time I reached the interstate. But when the high beams from a passing truck washed over the glass, I swore I saw them glimmer faintly, like something etched just beneath the surface. I should have gone straight home. That's what any rational person would have done, put distance between myself and whatever I'd stumbled into, bury the memory until it rotted. But the problem with encountering something like that is it doesn't just leave you. It follows, not in steps or shadows, but in the way it rewires your thoughts. You start to wonder if you ever left. The days after, I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I'd hear that 3-syllable chant, the one I couldn't repeat but somehow understood wasn't meant for comfort. I'd wake with my jaw clenched, my knuckles aching like I'd been gripping the knife again. I avoided mirrors. Not because I was afraid of what was behind me, but because I was afraid my reflection might not move with me anymore. By the 4th night, I couldn't take it. I loaded my pack again, though lighter this time. Just enough food for a day, water, flashlight, compass, no tent. I told myself I wasn't going back to camp. I just wanted to see the edge of the park again, prove to myself that it was still there, that the path in was the same as I remembered, that maybe it had just been exhaustion and fear twisting my perception. But when I reached the old road, there was nothing. No collapsed ranger station, no overgrown trailhead, just a stretch of pines pressing against the asphalt like they'd always been there. I almost turned around. Almost. But then I caught it, just at the corner of my vision, a flicker of orange light deep between the trunks. A campfire, small, steady. I killed the truck's engine and stepped out into the cool night. The forest was silent again, but not the same suffocating silence from before. This was the kind that waits, patient, letting you make the next move. I followed the glow, moving carefully, my boots sinking into the soft loam. The light didn't waver, didn't grow brighter or dimmer, until I stepped into the clearing. The fire pit was there. The stones were the same. But this time, only one figure sat before it. Its back to me, shoulders hunched slightly. I knew before it turned that it would be me. Not the pale version, not the scarred one, not the mouthless one. Just me, exactly as I was in that moment. Same clothes, same dirt on the knees from kneeling near the stream, same scratch on my wrist from the brambles. The firelight flickered against its face, and when it smiled, it was my smile. "You came back," it said in my voice. "I thought you might." I tried to speak, but the words caught in my throat. It didn't seem to mind. It gestured to the ground opposite the fire. "Sit. It's easier to explain this way." I don't remember crossing the space between us, only that one moment I was standing at the edge of the clearing, and the next I was lowering myself onto the dirt. The heat from the flames felt stronger than it should have, as if the fire wasn't burning wood but something that didn't belong to this place. "This park isn't gone," it said. "It just stopped letting itself be found by most people. But you found the stone. That means you can walk the paths the others can't. You can leave whenever you want, but you'll never really be out." The fire popped, sending a spray of embers into the air. I watched them drift up, only to hang in place, suspended like stars trapped in amber. "Why me?" I asked, my voice raw. It tilted its head, studying me like I was a puzzle. Because you listen, it said simply. Most don't. They come here and try to own it, to mark it, to change it. You carried its silence with you. I didn't know whether to feel honored or afraid. Probably both. It leaned forward then, its gaze locking with mine. But that silence is a weight. You can put it down now, or keep it. If you keep it, you'll see more than you should. Hear more. And sooner or later, you'll be the one at this fire, talking to another you. The thought sent a cold rush through me. I opened my mouth to answer, but the firelight flared suddenly, blinding, and when my vision cleared, I was alone. No fire, no figure, just a ring of white flowers facing inward, their petals trembling in a breeze I couldn't feel. I left without looking back. Even now, months later, when I walk past a stretch of woods, sometimes I'll hear the murmur of voices, faint but familiar. Sometimes I'll catch the scent of wet wood and metal, and sometimes in my dreams I see a fire pit and a figure waiting on the other side. It's always me. If there's one thing I've learned from that place, one thing I would tell anyone who dares to go deeper than the well-lit paths, it's this. The wilderness does not need to shout to be dangerous. It waits. It learns you. And if you give it enough of yourself, it will remember your face. I still camp. I still hike. I still drive into the quiet corners of the country where the maps grow pale and the roads give up. But now I do it with an awareness that I didn't have before. I keep my fires small. I never leave anything in a circle. And if I hear my name at night, I don't answer, not even once. Because I know now that some invitations can't be taken back. There's a strange beauty in it, though, in knowing that there are places in this country, forgotten national parks, erased trails, valleys choked with time, that have decided who can enter and who will leave. And maybe we don't belong there. Maybe we never did. But for those who stumble in, there's a choice to make. Run until you find a road again, or stay long enough to learn the rules of a place that doesn't care about ours. The memory of the stone is what keeps me awake sometimes. Not the sight of it, but the hum, the way it threaded through my bones, the way I felt like it was asking me a question I couldn't translate. I wonder if that's how the others heard it too, the ones who never made it out. I wonder if the versions of me around that fire were just possibilities I hadn't walked into yet, or if they'd already happened, and I was the echo. I think about the old man in the bait shop, the way his hands trembled, the way he looked at the door as if something might walk in. Maybe he'd seen his own face before. Maybe he'd been told not to follow the stone and done it anyway. That's the thing. They never tell you the rules in time. You only learn them by breaking them. And by then, the place already has your name. So if you're out there planning your next trip, itching to pitch your tent in a clearing no one's camped in for decades, I'll tell you this. Know the difference between being alone and being unnoticed. The forest will notice you. The ground will remember the weight of your steps. And if you're very unlucky, you'll notice it noticing you back. I've been to many parks since Roosevelt Glade, but none of them feel the same. The birds sing, the wind moves, the light changes as the day passes, all the things you expect. Yet in the back of my mind, I'm always measuring the silence against that other place, waiting for the moment it folds in on itself, and I hear that chant again. I know, deep down, it's not over. Places like that don't just let you go. They wait for you to wander close enough to the line again. And one day, whether I want to or not, I'll step over it. The flowers will be there. The fire will be lit. And across from me, in that impossible place, another version of me will smile, lean forward, and say, "You came back. I thought you might." When that day comes, I'll know there's no leaving. And maybe that's all right. Because if the park has taught me anything, it's that some stories aren't meant to be escaped. They're meant to be finished.